The next company to present is Surgical Science. The company is a leading supplier of virtual reality simulators for medical training. And the company recently completed a transformative acquisition of a 4 times bigger competitor in bionics. With that, I leave the word to you, the CEO of the company, Gisli Hennermark.
Thank you, Christian. Nice to be here at Pareto's Healthcare Day. Let's get going with the presentation. So if we jump forward, well, I actually jump forward, sorry. There we go. So, Surgical Science has a vision that everyone on their way into the operating room should know that the surgeon has trained and been objectively certified in a safe simulated environment. So concretely, what we do as a company is that we do virtual reality simulation for technical skills of the surgeon. So if you see the surgeon there on the right-hand side of the slide, it is tricky to work with minimum invasive surgery, looking at the screen, recalculating what you see from the camera feed to what you need to do with your instruments. So this is all about hand-eye coordination, psychomotor skills, and the muscle memory. And this is something that we've been doing for more than 20 years. So for a long time, we have been a research company. And if I go ahead and show you this slide, you can see on the left-hand side of the slide a simulator. This is a hardware that we have designed and own the rights to. But the big part of Surgical Science is the software. So when we play the video here, you can actually, let me see if the video is going to play. Yeah, here we go. You can actually see what it looks like when you're working and practicing your technical skills on the hardware. This is what you see on the monitor. So everything is computer generated and you get objective feedback of all your movements. So this is really the core asset of Surgical Science, this software where we have done our own proprietary platform for the interaction between the organ, the tissue, and the instrument. And then we put the graphic layer on top. And it's with these products that we have for a long time worked with academia. So we have sold these products to university hospitals for the benefit of surgeons that are still under training before they come in and work with human patients. And you can really then learn all these things and you can get your objective score on your proficiency. And working with these key opinion leaders in academia, getting the independent validation research done by our customers and all the learnings have really been of great value to Surgical Science, because what has happened in the last 5-6 years is that we see what we call the digital surgery. And that means instead of the surgeon holding an instrument that goes into the body, the surgeon actually now in robotic assisted surgery, which is the beginning of digital surgery, sits in a console, still needs a lot of technical skills to maneuver the joysticks, and then through a digital feed, the instruments are moving inside of the body of the patient. But this means that we can actually license our software that we've been constructing for the last 20 years and embed that directly on the med device company's hardware. And in this next slide, we see a few examples of robotic assisted surgery. To the left in the slide, you see the console of CMR Surgical and their product called Versus. On the top, you see the robotic arms. But then we have implemented white label, our software, directly onto the console. So that's called the Versus trainer. And every one of these robots comes with the Versus trainer. So that has actually been a great model for us to grow our business. And we now have 10 plus customers within surgical robotics that have our software embedded and that are licensing our software from us. And the vast majority of these companies have not yet come to market. So Intuitive Surgical, the market leader, they're a customer of us, they are at the market. CMR Surgical got regulatory approval beginning of last year. And we have Medicaroid, which is a joint venture between Kawasaki Robotics and Sysmex that received their regulatory approval late last year, during fall last year. And the penetration here of surgical robotics is still only about 2%. So only 2% of the surgeries you can perform robotically are today performed robotically. So it's big growth opportunity here. And the robotics companies are really interested to have simulation in order to ensure patient safety and also to get surgeons credentialed on their platforms so they can safely work with patients. So they, for example, use our software in their regulatory processes to get to demonstrate to regulatory authorities that they have a patient-safe manner to introduce new products. But Surgical Science itself, we are not subject to regulatory approval. So we supply our software as one component to our customers, who then are responsible versus regulatory authorities. I've talked about how we've been in this business for a long time, 20 years, a lot of research, focus on academia, and then 5-6 years ago, moving more into med device companies licensing our software. We've also had a very clear acquisition strategy since we took the company public in 2017 at Nasdaq First North Growth Market. And we currently have some financial targets for 2024. But after the last acquisition, we will revise those financial targets and communicate them once that revision is done. But if we look a little bit on our acquisition agenda, and I get a lot of questions about this. We have actually done a substantial amount of work and analysis a few years ago, and we really sort of set what we would like the picture for us in this landscape to look like. So what we really focused on was customer base, primarily in industry OEM. We looked for complementary technologies that we can introduce both in our educational products towards university hospitals and to med device companies. We looked for additional application areas, and by that I mean different parts of the body where you can apply simulation solutions. And we looked for this niche competence of software developers. So if we look at what we have today after the 3 major acquisitions we've done, we have really made a consolidation of a growing niche market with high barriers to entry. So especially within surgical robotics, that we believe is the most interesting niche. But especially with Symbionics, we now also have a number of other application areas where digitalization is about or have yet to happen, meaning that we have more IP that we can embed onto med devices as we go forward. Taking a little bit of deep dive into the numbers of the Symbionics acquisition, you can see that Symbionics, which has been our main competitor and been also in this business for a long time, similar history to Surgical Science, but substantially larger. So on top line, you can see if we compare 2020, they're about 3.5 times as big as Surgical Science. If you go all the way down to EBIT, you see they're similar profitability, a little bit less, but still 2.7 times the EBIT in share numbers. So where it differs a bit is on the gross margin, because Symbionics still have a larger portion of their business in educational products, and those educational products vary in gross margins. So there are some perhaps more low volume products that you need in order to sell big volumes. You need to do bundle deals. But they also have a very interesting, good industry OEM portfolio that is growing. You can also see another factor is that they sell more through distributors and less direct. And that also is then reflected in the OPEX, which is relatively lower in comparison to the sales. EBITDA is hard to compare because they don't capitalize any of their R&D. But all of this we were able to do in what we believe in a very good way for our shareholders. They had some dilution, but still, if you were a shareholder in Surgical Science before, you had 100% of your shares there, and now you own the equivalent of 75% of both these companies, which we believe is a great deal for our shareholders. But the most important thing when we do acquisitions is that we do it for strategic purposes. So we integrate the businesses that we acquire. They're part of a plan, what we're going to do with them. So it's not, we are not sort of an acquisition machine having tons of companies under the same umbrella. No, we integrate the businesses together. And perhaps the most important part of these last acquisitions is that we really are in a great position to deliver more value to our customers. And specifically in surgical robotics, we see ourselves as maintaining the technology leadership and keep on developing what our customers can do with our simulation for their customers and for patient safety. So we see ourselves as we are owning our own IP and our software, and then we embed that component in the different ecosystems, and we keep on making that component better through technology leadership. Moving on and looking a little bit at the Q2, which was released 2 weeks ago. The first observation is that we are in a strong growth phase. If we compare quarter over quarter, and we have 2 COVID quarters here, Q2 in 2020 and Q2 in 2021, you can see that our accounted growth was 77% in Q2, and then you can slice it and dice it in a lot of different ways. Perhaps the most meaningful to measure the underlying growth is the last one there of the left top graph. That is constant currencies and comparable units. So then adding back acquired businesses to the comparable numbers, we're growing a little bit more than 60%. You can also note down on the right-hand side there, if we look at Q1s over time, we are really in a strong growth phase. And a lot of this is driven by surgical robotics companies coming to market, buying license revenue from us, meaning license revenue for us, and also needing help to embed software onto their platforms, which generates some software development revenue or consulting revenue for us. If we look at educational products, it's very uneven depending on market and very COVID related still. Some markets are rather closed. Overall sales, about 37 million Swedish crowns. And again, you can slice it and dice it in a couple of different ways. But we see that we're still have a positive EBIT, 4 million Swedish crowns. And EBITDA margin gets affected by a lot of currency effects. So it's perhaps a little bit less of a good measurement right now, but we can look at the cash flow in a couple of slides, which I think it's more important to look at. And we do have a strong cash position. End of Q2 we had just below 270 million Swedish crowns. Industry OEM. I have already spoken about that quite a lot and telling you about how new robot companies are coming to market, buying licenses for us. We have had as a strategy to really make sure that we get our basic skills, our basics exercises and sort of the platform embedded on as many of these surgical robotic companies as possible. And then the business model is, once they do a serial number or do a robot that they include the simulation on, we get paid once. And then after a few years or a number of years, that robot is replaced, and that means a new license revenue for us. But with the acquisition of Symbionics, we also now see where we believe the market is going, and that is if you have a base fee for the basic package, you can then from that add additional content, advanced instrumentation, different procedures, and you can start charging for that in a different way, as long as it's a win-win between you and the customer. And within our Symbionics part of the business, we have a subscription model where we get paid on installed base. It's a mix, actually. We get paid for units shipped, and then we get paid on installed base. But the part that is a payment on installed base is the larger part of the revenue. And educational products, as mentioned, it was very uneven growth. It was a good growth compared to last year. But the vast majority of our revenue came from the United States and China. So we still had a lot of markets that were not performing in Q2 and very COVID related. I mean, a lot of the markets were still closed, and the healthcare system focusing entirely on COVID related issues. In the United States, we have particularly a niche product that aims at the surgical technologists. It's similar to an operating nurse, and they are not trained primarily at the hospital, but at a college level. So that customer group was easier to go after. So given that we're sort of not firing on all cylinders yet, we're still very pleased with the growth there in Q2. Looking at this a little bit longer term, you can see that the industry OEM part of our business is the one that's relatively growing the fastest. You can also see the gross margins over time is coming up, and that is related to a larger part of our revenues consisting of license revenue. Of course, especially early on with these surgical robotic companies, it's a little bit uneven, where there can be some consulting revenue mixed in, and that can vary from quarter to quarter. But as these companies come out and get a stable volume, we will see this sort of more even out over the years. That's what we believe. Like I said, I think cash flow is always very important to keep an eye on, and our cash flow from operating activities was very strong in Q2. We have a big, strong cash position also after the acquisition of Symbionics, and gross margin has remained at a good level. Finally, a few words about the business that we did acquire. We disclosed in our Q2 report a little bit of financial information on Symbionics standalone. They did have growth in Q2. They grow from $9 million to 10.7, and profitability on EBIT level was somewhat down, but that then is totally attributable to the cost-cutting measure in Q2 of 2020. They actually had from their owner, 3D Systems, a sort of a across-the-line salary cut. So there were cost reductions that were COVID-related in the comparable figures. So the underlying profitability is still there, and there is growth. And we are currently reviewing our financial goals, and we have also commented on when we're now bringing these businesses together, integrating them. Part of this is a carve out then from the seller of Symbionics. So we will have some structural investments in IT systems and so on for the 200 plus people company we will be when that we are today. The transaction closed just 1 week ago, so still getting used to that, but a lot of good positive energy from everyone involved. And for this team, primarily based in Tel Aviv, They have been part of a large 3D printing company. They've been a small part of that, and now they're a big part of a pure play simulation company with big ambitions going forward, which I think fits that team well because they're very ambitious. So I think my 20 minutes are just about up, and I open up to you, Christian, if you have any questions for me.
Thank you for the presentation, Gisli, and congratulations on closing the acquisition of Symbionics. And this is a competitor or former competitor, which was almost 4 times bigger than you in terms of revenues. It should be impossible, or at least very difficult, to make such a transaction. So can you give us the background on how this was possible to make?
Yeah, sure. Symbionics have for a long time been part of our acquisition agenda. I mean, when we analyzed this business and this industry that we're in, we really saw that Sense Graphics should be the first piece of the puzzle in building the company that we want to build. But part of that acquisition agenda was definitely Symbionics. Then a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, something happened that sort of opened up for this opportunity, and that is 3D Systems appointed a new CEO and a new CFO. And they rather quickly came out and explained that they have decided to focus on their core business, which is 3D printing, and that they were planning to make some divestments as well as acquisitions. So we quickly reached out to them, and after a bit of persuasion and dedication and pedagogical difficulties, we explained to them why we thought this could be a win-win, and it really was. I mean, they had, in my opinion, weak synergies between Symbionics and their core business, and they were very interested in a cash deal that was clean, and we could provide that for them. And at the same time, as we're making strategic investments, we communicated a lot with the Symbionics management to make sure that the chemistry and the energy and the fire was there. And when we felt it was, we could reach an agreement and actually make this acquisition. So it was somewhat of a stranded asset, Christian, in my opinion. And I think the new leadership of 3D Systems identified that. So it was a very, very good deal.
Very interesting indeed. I was thinking, since following this acquisition, are there any other application areas that you're interested in expanding into, perhaps through acquisitions in future?
Yeah, I think the application areas you're in, I think you should be market leader. Maybe you can be runner-up, but I never want to be number 3 or number 4, because then it's hard to make money. Now we have a broader IP portfolio, so we have some great software and in-house competence in ultrasound, in vascular, in orthopedics, and I mean, there are more parts to the original acquisition agenda that we have really stuck to. We have been really focused to not get sidetracked, but really stick to what we believe in. But in that acquisition agenda, there are more pieces to the puzzle. But right now we are also focusing on bringing the companies together. But there are definitely very interesting application areas that I think will grow substantially in the future, just as we've seen surgical robotics grow impressively over the last few years, and is also predicted to have a very strong growth going forward.
A comment on the penetration of robotic surgery. Only 2% of the procedures are assisted by robotic assisted systems as of today. And what do you believe will need to happen to increase this share?
I think that with these new entrants coming to market, I think you will have some head-on competition, but you will also have a lot of addressing parts of the market that have yet not been addressed. So I think that more companies, more alternatives for the hospitals, more specialized companies will drive this implementation. This increased penetration. I also think that patients are becoming aware of the benefits of having your surgery done robotically, depending on the kind of operation you need. And the really important part of this drive are the surgeons. The surgeons wants to work until they reach retirement age. And if they're going to do that, they need an ergonomical working position, which they get with surgical robotics, and they don't get when they're sort of hanging over the patient in the OR. So I think all those factors will come into play, and a bottleneck will also be patient safety and ensuring that you have surgeons that have a demonstrated proficiency in an objective way, and that's where simulation comes in.
Yes, very interesting indeed. Time is up, and that will be the final remarks from this presentation. Thank you very much, Gisli.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me here at Pareto. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you.